What makes a man swear he will never love again? And what kind of woman could walk straight through the walls he built around his heart? The October wind swept through Silver Fork like a restless spirit. It carried the scent of pine from the high slopes of the Absarokas and the sharp warning of an early winter. Dust swirled up the two narrow dirt streets, rattling the signs and slamming shutters against their hinges. Silver Fork was small, worn, and proud. A place where hope worked hard and disappointment walked freely. Eli Ward rode into town that morning like he always did, quiet, alone. A man carved out of hard weather and harder years. At 34, with sharp lines on his brow and hands scarred from ranch work, he was known for two things. He ran one of the finest spreads in the region, and he had turned down every sweet bride in the county without blinking. Widow, schoolteacher, rancher's daughter, it made no difference. Eli kept his heart locked like a barn door in a storm. Folks whispered he was too cold for love. Others said he was haunted by a ghost of a past he never spoke about. But no one truly knew the reason he stayed alone, and he liked it that way. He stepped into Morrison's Mercantile, dust still catching on his boots. The bell above the door let out a thin ring before falling silent. Tom Morrison, round as a flour sack and twice as friendly, looked up with a grin. "That wind trying to blow you clean into Wyoming," Morrison said. "It can try," Eli answered, handing over his supply list with a steady hand. His voice was a low drawl that carried no extra weight. He didn't waste words. As Morrison gathered the items, Pete Sawyer, a cheerful neighboring rancher, clapped Eli on the shoulder. "Heard Jack Brennan was sniffing around the South Fork of your creek again." Eli's jaw tightened. Not much showed on his face, but that small movement said enough. Brennan was rich, ruthless, and always hungry for more land, especially land with water. "Brennan's always where he shouldn't be," Eli said. Pete nodded, concern softening his usual smile. "Just watch yourself." Law bends toward the man with deeper pockets. Eli didn't answer. He knew that already. He finished loading his goods onto his pack mule when he noticed Morrison staring down the street. "Well, I'll be," the storekeeper murmured. Stage brought more than mail today. A worn wagon rolled into town, pulled by a single tired horse. It stopped near the boardwalk. A woman climbed down first. She moved with a quiet strength, not clumsy, not timid. Her dress was plain and dark, made for travel. A bonnet hid her face. Two children followed her. A boy, maybe 12, tall for his age, with shoulders already carrying more weight than they should, and a little girl, no more than 6 or 7, holding her mother's skirt like it was the last safe place on earth. They made a small island in the middle of the dusty street, a family worn thin by life but still standing. The woman, her name would soon be known as Miriam Lane, looked around town with a long, steady sweep of her eyes. This was not a woman running from something. This was a woman searching for a place to begin again. Eli told himself their troubles had nothing to do with him. Yet he found himself lingering instead of riding out. A gust of wind caught her bonnet ribbon, pulling loose strands of brown hair across her cheek. She brushed them aside with a tired gesture, and then her eyes lifted. They met his across the street. The moment held, quiet and strange. Not hopeful, not pleading, just a calm look of recognition. As if she saw something in him he had forgotten he still carried. A piece of pain he kept buried deep. He felt it like a spark hitting dry grass. She turned away first, guiding her children toward the Mercantile. Eli rode out of town without looking back, but her face stayed with him all the way home. Her steady eyes, her quiet strength, the way the boy stood guard beside her, the way the little girl clung to her like a heartbeat. He tried to shake it off. He had made a vow once, long ago, after losing the only family he ever had. A vow that he would never again open his door or his heart to anyone. Solitude was his shelter. Silence was his shield. And for years, that life had kept him safe from the kind of hurt that could break a man in half. But when he stepped inside his cold, quiet cabin that evening, something felt different. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. It pressed against him like a memory he didn't want to feel. He ate supper alone at the long wooden table he had built for a family that no longer existed. The empty chairs stared back at him, reminding him of the laughter that had once filled the room. He pushed the thought aside. Winter was coming. Work needed doing. He had no time for strangers or their troubles. But the wind outside whispered a different truth. He had seen her eyes. He had seen her strength. And something inside him, something he had buried deep, felt the first slow crack through the wall he had spent 10 long years building. Far below in Silver Fork, Miriam Lane bought a loaf of bread on credit. She asked the shopkeeper if work could be found, if land could be rented, if there was somewhere safe for her children to stay through winter. And Morrison, after a long and thoughtful pause, spoke a name. Eli Ward, a man who kept to himself, a man who trusted no one, a man who wanted no company at all. Miriam only asked one question. Is he honest? And Morrison, without hesitation, said yes. That night, as the last light faded from the valley, Miriam Lane stepped out into the cold wind, her children at her sides, and looked north toward the Ward Ranch. She had no way of knowing that the man at the end of that long road was living under a vow carved from heartbreak. She also had no way of knowing that she was the one gentle woman strong enough to break it forever. The next afternoon, the sky over Silver Fork was a pale, cold blue. The cottonwoods along the creek rattled their last yellow leaves as the wind moved through them in restless waves. Eli waited there, leaning against one of the old trunks, his arms crossed over his chest. He told himself he didn't know why he had agreed to meet her. But deep down, he did know. He just didn't want to admit it. He heard footsteps before he saw them. Miriam Lane walked toward him with steady, even strides. Tom walked close beside her, alert and protective. Little Alice followed behind, skipping once, then clutching her small treasure, a piece of white quartz, in her hand. They stopped a few feet away. Miriam didn't waste time with greetings or pleasantries. I came to speak plainly, she said. Her voice was calm and clear, but Eli noticed the faint tremor of exhaustion beneath it. She had been carrying too much weight for too long. I'm looking for work, she continued. My children and I need shelter for the winter. I can cook, clean, mend, keep stores. I know how to make a little stretch a long way. In return, all I ask is a warm place for my children to sleep and fair treatment. She didn't try to charm him, didn't plead, didn't soften her words with hopes or smiles. She stood like someone used to hardship, used to standing alone. Eli studied her quietly. He respected how she didn't hide or shrink. He respected that she spoke for her children first, herself second. But he had built walls for a reason. So he tested her. It's isolated, he said. Weeks can pass without anyone riding in or out. The storms shut the world down. And I'm a man of routine. I don't talk much. Don't want company. This wouldn't be friendly. It would be work. I'm not asking for anything else, she replied. He looked at the boy next. Tom met his stare with a lifted chin and a set jaw. I'm not asking for charity, the boy said. I can chop wood, tend animals, learn whatever needs learning. There was strength in his voice, a young strength, but real. Eli remembered being that age, forced to shoulder burdens meant for grown men. He understood the boy's pride better than he liked to admit. He nodded once. Then little Alice, oblivious to the tension, bent down to the edge of the creek and lifted another small stone from the water. She held it up, her face lighting with the simple joy of discovery, a soft innocence in a hard world. The moment tugged at him in a way he didn't expect. He looked at the three of them, this small, weary family standing together like a single unit of survival, and something in him shifted. His house had been silent for 10 long years. Too long. 1 month, he said finally. A trial. You work. You stay. We see if it fits. Miriam nodded without hesitation. That is fair. She held out her hand. He hesitated only a breath before taking it. Her grip was firm. Her hands were work-worn like his. Not soft, not fragile, real. They walked to the ranch in silence. Eli rode ahead, while Miriam, Tom, and Alice followed the narrow trail over the rise. When they reached the house, a sturdy log cabin set in a clearing, the sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the yard. Inside, Miriam set to work immediately. She didn't wait to be told. She moved with quiet purpose, opening cupboards, sweeping corners, clearing clutter. She found a small dish towel embroidered with a bluebird, a relic from a life Eli had packed away long ago. Without asking, she washed it gently and hung it by the sink. Something warm stirred in the cold room. Eli said nothing, but he felt it. That evening they discussed terms. He laid his rules out plainly, wanting to keep distance between this arrangement and the life he'd refused for years. You'll have a place to sleep, food, but this is not a promise for spring. It's not something permanent. When winter ends, you'll need plans of your own. Miriam listened and nodded. And my terms, she said quietly, are simple. No harsh words toward my children, no drinking in the house, and no violence. They have lived enough fear for one lifetime. Her voice didn't shake. She wasn't asking. She was setting the lines that protected her family. Eli found himself respecting her even more. You have my word, he said. Later, when the children were asleep, Eli lay in his bed, staring up at the ceiling beams he had carved long ago. He heard a soft sound drifting through the quiet house. A gentle voice telling a bedtime story. Miriam's voice, steady, warm, a mother's voice. It wrapped around the loneliness inside him like a blanket on a cold night. He closed his eyes. It's only a winter's arrangement, he told himself. But the sound of her voice whispered a different truth. The next morning brought a new kind of beginning. Tom met Eli in the barn before sunrise, eager to work. Eli taught him how to check the weather by reading the sky, how to tie knots that wouldn't slip, how to move quiet and steady around cattle. The boy learned fast. Inside, Miriam brought life into the house. Bread warmed the air. Coffee tasted gentler. The rooms no longer echoed when someone walked through. Days passed. The rhythm of work settled into something natural, something steady, something that felt, against Eli's will, almost like home. Until the storm. The sky turned a strange yellow. The air went still, not peaceful, dangerous. Eli felt it in his bones. Hail, he said. Get everything inside. They barely made it before the first stone struck the roof with the force of a thrown rock, then another, then dozens, then hundreds. The sound was deafening, like the sky was angry enough to tear the earth apart, Alice cried. Tom stood stiff with fear. Eli knelt beside the little girl and pointed to the beams overhead. Hear that? He said. That's the house fighting. It's strong. It's keeping us safe. Slowly, the fear eased from her eyes. Outside, the world turned white with ice. Inside, something else took shape, something stronger than wood and stone. A bond forged in fear and held together by trust. When the storm finally passed, the damage was heavy. The roof of the chicken coop was cracked, half the garden shredded, fences broken. But they didn't break. Together, they rebuilt. Without a single wasted word, they worked as one. Every nail driven, every plank lifted, every small task shared. By sundown, they were no longer four people staying under one roof. They were something more. That evening, as Eli and Tom checked the last gate, Eli spoke without thinking. We'll need to check the south pasture fence tomorrow. Tom paused. We? He repeated softly. Eli nodded once. Yes, we. It was one small word, but it was the first real crack in the walls he had sworn would never fall. The days after the hailstorm settled into a deeper rhythm. The land was wounded, but healing slowly. So were they. The work was hard, but they shared it. The silence in the house was no longer cold. It was warm, full of small sounds. A spoon against a cup, Alice humming by the window, Tom practicing his knots, the quiet scrape of Miriam's needle through cloth. All those small things stitched themselves into something larger, something like a family. Eli felt the change most of all. He found himself watching Miriam when she worked. noticing how she moved with calm strength. He noticed the careful way she spoke to her children, the quiet way she listened when they talked. He noticed how she never complained, never asked for more than she needed, never stepped beyond the respect she had promised him. She lived in his house, but she didn't intrude. She filled the spaces around him with warmth, in a way he had forgotten was possible. But danger lived in the shadows of Silver Fork, and it was watching them. Jack Brennan rode to the ranch one cold morning, the mud still wet from melting hail. He brought 2 men with him, and a smile that didn't touch his eyes. He sat on his horse just past the new gate, the one Tom and Eli had built side by side. Eli split wood with steady swings, but his eyes locked on Brennan with the focus of a man ready to protect what was his. "Ward," Brennan said, his voice smooth and poisonous. "I see you've taken on help. Getting soft?" Eli didn't answer. He didn't need to. Brennan leaned in his saddle, his gaze drifting toward Miriam and the children. His eyes lingered too long, his smile turned cruel. "A man with a family," he said, "has so much to lose." The meaning was clear. Every word was a threat. Eli stepped toward him, slow and controlled. "You are not welcome here," he said. "Ride out." Their eyes locked. 2 storms meeting in the thin, cold air. Brennan smirked and turned his horse, but his threat hung in the air long after he disappeared down the trail. That night, the wind howled against the house. Eli didn't sleep. He stood at the window with his rifle in his hands, watching the dark tree line. Waiting, and he wasn't wrong to wait. Days later, the attack came. It was near midnight when Eli smelled it. Smoke. Sharp. Bitter. Wrong. He rushed outside into the freezing dark. The haystacks were burning, 2 stacks already swallowed in fire, flames leaping high like angry giants. He didn't shout for help. He didn't need to. The house burst into motion. Miriam grabbed blankets and soaked them in water. Tom ran back and forth with buckets from the creek as fast as his legs could carry him. Alice, too young to help, was moved into the root cellar, safe and hidden from the flames. The heat was blinding. Sparks flew like angry hornets. The wind whipped fire across the yard toward the barn and the house. Eli fought with everything he had. He pushed burning hay away with long iron poles. Tom stayed at his side, choking on smoke but refusing to run. Miriam covered the barn with soaked blankets, beating back every spark that landed. Hours passed in a blur of fire and fear. But they did not break. By dawn, the yard was a wasteland of blackened ash. 2 of the 3 haystacks were gone, months of feed destroyed. But the house still stood. The barn still stood. The family still stood. They had survived. And their neighbors saw the flames. Pete Sawyer arrived at first light, anger carved deep into his face. He brought 2 other ranchers with him. They had seen Brennan's men riding in the dark. They had come to help. "You're not alone, Eli," Pete said firmly. "Not anymore. We'll take turns keeping watch at night. Brennan won't get near you again." Eli had lived 10 years believing solitude protected him. But now, surrounded by men who showed up without being asked, he realized the truth. Strength wasn't silence. Strength was standing together. But Brennan wasn't finished. 3 days later, the deputy arrived with legal papers. Brennan was suing Eli for his water rights, the lifeblood of his ranch. A lie dressed as a lawsuit, a paper weapon meant to bleed him dry. Eli read the papers on the porch, his face unreadable, the cold wind lifting the edges of the document. Miriam came to sit beside him, her hands tight with worry. She set a small cloth bundle on the table. Inside was money. "I sold my mother's wedding ring," she said quietly, "for moments like this, for a fight we might have to face." Eli froze. She had given up the last piece of her old life for him. His breath left him in a long, steady exhale. That night, the storm hit, a true Montana blizzard, wind screaming against the walls, snow piling high, cold sharp enough to cut. They huddled inside, trying to warm their hands by the fire. Then Alice grew sick. Her fever rose fast, too fast. Her small body shook with chills. She cried out weakly. Miriam held her, fear tightening her face with every passing minute. "It was the berries," she whispered. "I warned her, but she's just a child." Eli didn't hesitate. "I'm getting the doctor." "You can't," Miriam said, tears shining in her eyes. "No one can ride in this storm." "I can." He saddled his strongest horse and rode into the white darkness. He rode blind, trusting instinct, trusting the land, trusting the horse beneath him. Snow stung his face. Wind clawed at him. The cold bit into his bones. But he rode because a little girl was fighting for her life, and she was his now, even if he hadn't said it aloud. Hours later, he returned with Dr. Whitaker. They worked through the night, fighting the fever with bitter medicine and cool cloths. Miriam stayed at Alice's side, whispering prayers. Eli kept the fire hot, never letting it fade. Just before dawn, the fever broke. Alice slept, rested, lived. And Eli sat beside Miriam as she cried in relief, her hand in his. Something broke open inside him, his vow of solitude, his fear of loss, his stubborn walls, all of it cracked. He took her hand gently. "We fight this together," he said. "All of it." The next morning, Tom approached him with his own offering, his wages, saved in a small folded roll. "For the lawyer," the boy said, trying to sound grown. Eli shook his head. Then Alice tottered out of bed, still weak, holding a jar of her treasures, pennies and buttons. "For the house," she whispered. Eli's voice failed him. He looked at them, the three people who had become his life without him noticing when or how. He didn't push their offerings away this time. He pushed away his fear. "This isn't a winter arrangement," he said softly. "Not anymore. If we're going to fight for this place, then let it not be my house." He looked straight at Miriam. "Let it be our home." Her breath caught. Tears filled her eyes, not from fear or hardship, but something gentler, something finally safe. She nodded, and that was enough. Days later, Eli brought Miriam to the courthouse and added her name to the ranch ledger beside his. Tom and Alice stood proudly beside them. Outside, Brennan waited with a cruel smirk. Eli didn't say a word. He simply stepped forward and punched Brennan so hard the man fell into the mud. The town saw it. The judge heard it. The lawsuit fell apart. The ranchers testified against Brennan. The truth of the fire came to light, and for the first time in his life, Brennan faced justice. He was sentenced to prison. Silver Fork breathed easier. Spring came slowly to the Ward Ranch. Snow melted into the earth. The creek ran strong, and new life pushed through the thawing ground. The house was no longer quiet. It was warm, alive, full of soft laughter and the sound of boots on the porch. One evening, the four of them sat on the steps, watching the sun set over the mountains. The bell in the yard chimed softly in the breeze. Alice leaned against Miriam. Tom whittled wood with steady hands, and Eli rested his arm gently around the woman who had healed every hurt he thought was permanent. Miriam looked up at him, her voice soft. "A cowboy turned down every sweet bride in the county," she said, "until one gentle woman broke his vows forever." Eli smiled, the kind of smile that comes from a heart finally given permission to beat again. He whispered back, "I'm yours, all of me, for the rest of my life." And under the warming Montana sky, their new family held on to each other, knowing the worst had passed and the best was finally beginning.